Hello everybody and welcome to the Belief in the North-East Wayside Crosses survey. In this short lecture I'm going to introduce you to the notion of wayside crosses. What are they and why do they matter? We're going to look at the aim of the crosses survey, which is going out and recording these little known aspects of the religious landscape of North-East England. We're going to look at some of the basic level recording techniques we're going to try and carry out, and then I'm going to finish off by talking about some more advanced digital recording techniques which you might want to try, although there is no compulsion to do so. Overall, this talk will probably take about 20 minutes. It's very much a rapid trot through the basic issues. Obviously, at any point in the project, if you have any further questions, don't hesitate to email me, and my contact details are later in this presentation. So what are wayside crosses? Well, a lot of you will be familiar with the notion of the great pieces of carved sculpture belonging to the early medieval church, which are found widely in North-East England. These stone crosses, in particular from the northeast of England, rank amongst the best in Britain. These are elaborate pieces of work, often carrying complex designs, interlace images and of taken from the Bible and from other stories. And the northeast of England, it has an amazing resource of these early medieval stones. Many were actually erected in or around churches and churchyards and had a variety of purposes. But as well as these very elaborate ones, and the ones which are put in or near churches tend to survive quite well, there's also a wider tradition of putting these stone crosses out in the landscape, often marking the edges of estates or marking important routeways, often over upland areas. On the left we can see the stump of the cross at Bowlam called Legs Cross. This is an early medieval cross, and it probably marks the edge of a big block of land owned by the Anglo-Saxon monastery at Gainford. On the right we can see the so-called Ray Cross up on Stainmore, up on the pass going over between Lancashire, County Durham and Westmoreland. This is right up on the edge of the A66, and it probably marks this upland routeway allowing access between the west and east over the Pennines. So there's a tradition of having these crosses out in the landscape which date back to the Anglo-Saxon period. But what we're looking at are the wayside crosses and stone crosses from a slightly later period, from the period after really the Norman conquest, because it's after the Norman conquest, after the mid-11th century, that the great tradition of these elaborate carved crosses largely dies out. There are one or two exceptions, such as the Kellow cross from County Durham, we can see on the left, but the majority of these later wayside crosses are often much more simple and less elaborate. A good example of one of these very simple crosses with with either the crosshead not surviving or never having had a proper cross in the first place. We can see on the right, from very south of County Durham, Granger the Beck cross. You can see in this case there's just a simple stone cross base with a cross shaft surviving. Now, some of these crosses survive in fairly well. Very few survive in their entirety. On the left, we can see an example of a cross which has been a wayside cross that's been quite heavily restored at Esh, where you can see there's the original cross base, then the cross shaft has been largely replaced, but the original cross head does still survive. So on the left, we've got a kind of composite monument which includes medieval elements and later restored elements. On the right, we see the Bishopton cross. Again, this is a not terribly well preserved example, but you can see you've got quite a substantial cross base with some associated stonework, and then just the very stump of a cross shaft poking up out of that cross base. And in many cases, it's actually just the cross base that survives to be seen today. Sometimes these can be relatively unprepossessing monuments, but they're still quite important. Here you can see on the left one of the cross bases in the churchyard at Alnham up in Northumberland, And on the right, you can see one of the cross bases surviving up on the Hjuff on Lindisfarne, on Holy Island. So these later medieval crosses can be often rather unspectacular, and it's often this unspectacular nature which explains why they've survived so well. They clearly had a range of functions. We know that some were almost certainly, again, like some of those earlier medieval ones, some of these crosses were used to mark routeways, particularly over upland areas, locations where it's maybe not easy to keep to the path, areas where there weren't villages or settlements through which a traveller could find their way or navigate easily. Some examples of these kind of upland crosses include the cross base at Edmundbyres on a route up over the North Pennines, and on the right, this is the cross base called Outer Golden Pot, which is one of a series along one of the drove rays up through upland Northumberland. There are other crosses which do survive. Not every kind of medieval or post-medieval cross was always a route marker. Sometimes crosses could be used to mark important places such as markets. Here we see the market cross on Holy Island in the square. Now, in this case, most of the cross is a later 19th century repair or recreated version, but we know that the earlier crosshead does survive elsewhere, and much of the cross base itself is probably original. Whilst on the right we can see all that survives of the market cross at Stanhope, which, as you can see, has been relocated and moved into the churchyard at Stanhope. And this leads us on to our final group of medieval crosses, the crosses which were actually erected deliberately within churchyards. So on the right we can see the cross, very fine cross, erected in the churchyard at Blanchland. We've got traces of another one, in this case in Thockrington at Northumberland. Now, sometimes, we've already seen an example of this from Alnham, there are cross bases placed in the churchyards, and sometimes there's documentary evidence which seems to suggest that probably they were originally placed somewhere else out in the landscape. So not every single cross or cross base in a churchyard was originally placed there. And it's often that churches attract these kind of things. They're moved in often by enthusiastic vicars and priests interested in religious history and archaeology, often in the 19th and early 20th century. Often these church crosses and wayside crosses have various folklore traditions connected to them. On the left, we can see a postcard from Holy Island, where there's a tradition that when brides-to-be get married on the island, they are helped to leap over the cross base, known as the petting stone, which stands at one end of the church. And on the right, we can see Commons Cross up in Upland, Northumberland, which was, although not much is survive of it now, has folkloric traditions which associate it with stories connected to King Arthur. So often these objects out of the landscape attract all sorts of interesting folkloric stories and traditional stories which are worth recording. So why do these crosses matter? They're not as elaborate or complex as some of the early medieval crosses, but nonetheless, I think these very simple stone crosses and cross bases are important. They remind us that in the later medieval world, although most religious life was focused around the parish church, there's a much wider religious landscape out there. This is a world where things like holy wells are used, and where crosses would have formed important landmarks, both physical and kind of symbolic, in the places and villages and the countryside in which most people worked. Often these stone crosses, because they're far simpler and far less elaborate, are often neglected and overlooked. While most are protected, there's one or two which don't even have formal protection looking after them. They haven't attracted the kind of formal in-depth study that the earlier Anglo-Saxon crosses have attracted. And often, because they are neglected, they risk being damaged by erosion, by movement, by people damaging them by accident, and just being overgrown and lost in vegetation. Some of these just lie literally at the edge of roads or almost concealed by hedges. So I think it's important to actually go out and try and formally record as many of these crosses as we can in the northeast of England. And that's the aim of this project. The aim of this project is to get you, the volunteers, to go out into the landscape and try and carry out some basic recording on some of these crosses. Now, to get things going, I have compiled a list of all the crosses and cross bases of broadly medieval medieval date in the northeast of England, which I am aware of. Now, there's probably almost certainly some which have escaped my notice. I suspect in particular that there's probably quite a few churchyard crosses which I haven't got on my initial list. As I said, this kind of reflects the very fact that these things are often seen as unimportant or unimpressive compared with the elaborate early medieval crosses. Equally, as I said, many are not looked after. They're just sitting in fields or stuck on the edge of roads. And the aim of this project is to try and create an up-to-date record of all the existing crosses and cross bases of 11th century date or later. And what do I mean by an up-to-date record? I'm talking about collecting some basic information which we're largely lacking, so some basic measurements, getting precise locations. Often the locational information I've been able to collect is fairly imprecise. We're also going to make a record of their condition and note any potential threats to them in the long or short term. As part of this project, if possible, I'd also like to create an archive of three-dimensional digital models which we can create as part of this survey project. On the right, you can see my initial map showing that actually these crosses are spread pretty widely across the region. There's crosses from lowland areas, lots around Durham, but also they're found up in the North Pennines, up in the upland areas of Otterburn and heading into the Cheviots. Some areas there's noticeable gaps. So, for example, in the heavily settled area of Tyne and Wear, you can see fewer seem to survive, but there may still be some lurking out there which we've not been able to pick up yet. So, if you want to get involved in this project, what do we need to do? Well, we are going to issue, if you're interested in taking part, one of the first things you need to do is email me, and my contact details I'll share in a minute. And I need you to let me know the area, the broad area you're interested in exploring. So if you're based in North Northumberland, tell me you're in North Northumberland. If you're keen to go for a day up in the North Pennines, let me know. And I'll try and allocate you a cross or a couple of crosses to have a look at. What I will then need you to do is, first of all, find the cross. Now, hopefully that will be easy, but not necessarily, and that's part of the fun. Then I need you to complete a recording form, take some basic measurements and take some basic photographs. And then I need you to send those in to me so I can start building up our database. I also, if you're interested and if you're keen and interested in exploring technology, I'd like you to try and explore the methods we're going to propose to you for making a three-dimensional digital model of the stone cross you've been allocated using a simple phone app. And once we've collected all this information together, we'll be publicly sharing this on the website, as well as sharing the detailed technical information with important relevant bodies such as local archaeology offices, landowners and churches and that kind of organisation. So, first things first, you'll need to email me to be allocated a cross or a couple of crosses. I'll probably only allocate a couple at a time because I want to make sure everyone gets a fair crack at the whip recording these. I don't want one person to hog all the cross recording because that's part of the fun, is going out and doing the exploring. There's my email address there, so you email me there. And then I need you to, when you go out onto the site, I need you to download some of the forms. I've put the list there of the place, the web address of the place to find the recording form there. That's on our Belief in the Northeast website. So download the recording form, and you can see there's some basic information which needs recording. So the cross name, I will usually have provided that to you. But if when you get there's any other alternative names, so there might be a little panel, or there might be if it's a churchyard, there might be a record in the church parish guide. So if you come across any other alternative names to the cross, note that down. I need you to note the parish and village down. That should be obvious. I should have already given you that basic information. And then, although I'll have given you hopefully enough locational information to find the cross, if you can provide a more precise location, that would be incredibly useful. Now, you can provide that in the form of an Ordnance Survey grid reference if you know how to do those, or you can download the What 3 Words app and provide a What 3 Words reference. If you don't know what 3 Words is, I suggest you Google that. It's an app which provides and helps you provide detailed locational data. So put the relative locational data in that box, and then a simple description. It doesn't need to be a really detailed work of description, but just describe basically what you see. Do you see a cross and a cross base? Do you simply see a cross base? Is it partly restored? Does it look like it's been damaged recently? Is it overgrown by vegetation? Just anything useful which you think we might need to know for recording the project. And then there's some more detailed individual boxes where you can try and record each component of a cross. So first of all, is there a base? Now, most crosses will have stone bases, but 1 or 2 are simply placed in the ground. So yes, no, then just describe a basic description of it and record some basic information. So width, depth, height for a base. If it's got kind of chamfers or steps, record information in there too. Again, with the socket, if you can see the socket, provide the information there. Obviously, you're only going to have a socket really if you've got a cross base. But again, tell us anything you can about it. Is it kind of running west-east or north-south? And particularly if there's no stone in it, you'll be able to get some before sort of measurements, width, depth, and height. But failing that, just try and record the width and the depth of the socket. Is the shaft there? Again, yes or no. Provide a simple description and provide some simple dimensions. And finally, the crosshead. Provide a simple description and some basic measurements. So we're not asking for an awful lot, but you will need to make sure you take a simple tape measure with you. A simple do-it-yourself B&Q £1.50 bargain tape measure will more than suffice. Then on the back of a recording card, recording form, there's a little bit more information we need. So perhaps a more detailed breakdown of the description of the site. So if it's in a churchyard, say, is it on the north, south, east, or west of the church? Is it by a footpath? Is it easily visible? Is it by a gate? So that kind of information which will help future visitors find the site. Then a little bit about the condition. So does it look like it's been overwhelmed by vegetation? Does it look like it's been damaged recently? Does it look like the stone is actually fragmenting? Again, anything which you think might be important there. And then any other additional comments. So it might be information, but there might be a little panel, or it might be clear that it's being looked after at the moment. It might be that people have left little offerings there. Sometimes people leave little coins on these things like they do at Holy Wells. So anything which you think might be interesting, record it in that final box. Now, finally, I'd also like a set of photographs. And I'll talk about those photographs in a minute. And then, so you just need to circle yes or no that you've been able to photograph it. Then yes or no whether you'll be able to make a 3D model of that. And we'll talk about that in a second. And then just some basic information about who you are and the date you've recorded it. So overall, that recording form is very, very simple. The next set of information you need to record is taking photographs of the cross itself. So in this case, you need to record photograph of the broader landscape context of the cross. So step back, try and provide some landscape context so you can see where the cross is located. Again, that will help future people try and find the cross, and it's particularly important if the cross is kind of buried in vegetation or in a difficult to find moorland location. Then just some basic photos, the front, the side and the back. You may feel that also you want to focus in on interesting details. So if there's any carving, if you can see the crosshead, if there's a panel, if there's any other settings or information you think might be relevant, try and get the photo of that. I'd rather have too many photos than too few. Do try to include a scale. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. For this kind of thing, using a normal 30 centimeter ruler would be absolutely fine. Now, when you've completed all this recording, the form and the photographs, send the photographs to me and the recording form to me. You can either do that directly via email. If you've got a lot of photographs, it might be too many to email. So feel free to send it to me via something like WeTransfer or whichever file transfer service you prefer. If you're not sure how to do this or you're getting stuck, again, just email me and I can talk you through it. Now, moving on to three-dimensional modelling. Now, some of you may have seen that increasingly archaeologists are using digital images, stitching lots and lots of digital photographs together to create three-dimensional models, which you can move around, zoom in and zoom out on. If you've not seen this before, I suggest you Google Sketchfab and see what the kind of things people on that have been producing. Now, in the past, this kind of three-dimensional modelling could be a bit complicated, and it's the kind of thing which is often mainly done by specialists with top, good cameras and sophisticated computing power. But we're starting to experiment with this project with the use of a very simple app called Kiri Engine. Now, you can download this onto Android phones and Apple phones. Very, very easy to find. You can have a pay version, but for anything we want to do, using the free version of the app should be absolutely fine. If you want to pay for the complicated subscription and want to explore it more, you're absolutely welcome to, but we're not asking you to do anything which can't be done by the free version. Now, rather than running through in detail precisely how to do it in this talk, I provided full instructions on the project website. Now, have a look at those instructions, experiment and play with Kiri Engine. If you think I need to put more detail on those instructions on the website, please let me know. I think I've got all the information there, but if you run across any problems, just ask and I can put more information there. Now, it's not essential that you do try the three-dimensional modelling. If you don't feel comfortable, that's absolutely fine. We've got plenty of volunteers. I'm confident we'll be able to find someone to try and do a digital model of all our crosses. So don't feel any pressure to do this if you don't feel particularly comfortable using this kind of technology. It's not complicated at all, but I appreciate that it's not for everyone. We're also going to be organising a couple of social walks where we can go out as a group to look at important examples of crosses, maybe do some recording together and look at how these crosses fit into their landscapes. I'm going to arrange for these once we get into the summer, when the weather's we can be a bit more confident about decent weather. So please keep an eye out on the Belief in the North-East mailing list for those dates, which I hope to announce in the next couple of weeks. And we'll go out as a group and we can actually do some practice recording and practice making some of those digital images. So that's something we can do together as a group. Not all this recording has to be done as individuals. So that gets me to the end of the talk. Hopefully I've taken you through everything you need to know. As ever, it's always possible I've neglected something, so if there's anything you want me to provide more context, more information, please don't hesitate to drop me a line using the email address I provided earlier on. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing from you all. Bye-bye.